Welcome to podcast number 10 of Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. Today we're delighted to welcome the amazing and unique Gary Karr as our first guest star on Bass Talk. I first met Gary in Manchester when I was about 17 or 18 years old, so it's been a long time coming to your concerts, Gary.
How old are you now?
20.
About 22, I think. Yeah, I forgot about this.
It was a long time ago. I loved going up to Manchester. It was a lot of fun. And there was always a great class to work with there.
It was amazing. This was the I think late 1970s when I first heard you and Harmon, and you did a very serious first half. And my teacher, Lawrence Gray, who knew you, and he said, yeah, the first half is always serious. I think you played Handel and all these things. And then after the interval, that's where Gary Karr really came into his own. And suddenly it was just like, everything just lit up. It was absolutely amazing. And it's never lost me, I have to say. I come away from your concerts so full of enthusiasm and energy. And I just think I can do anything. It's amazing. So thank you very much for your inspiration across the years.
David, you're too kind. I sort of patterned my recitals after the New York Philharmonic in the 1940s, and I don't know why they broke away from that. But in the 40s, the Philharmonic always did first half meat and potatoes. After that, then there was the soloist usually, and then they would always end the concert with my great friend Wilfred Josephs, who called it envoi, something that made people smile and walk away feeling good, and that was essentially what they now call the Pops concerts, which is really weird. So it was a great combination. And now everything has got, I think they're coming back to it again. But when I started doing that and adding humor, I was criticized quite a lot for that, even by my colleagues, because they felt that I was doing an injustice to the bass by adding humor to it. But, I'm a funny guy. I mean, why not share? And besides, I'm playing ridiculous music. And why not enjoy the fact that it is ridiculous? I mean, when I got known for playing the Paganini quite a lot. And when he performed that, he would have a stagehand come out on stage with a giant pair of scissors and cut 3 of the strings off his violin, leaving him with only 1 string. And that's how he used to perform it. I mean, if that isn't a circus act, what is? And if that didn't make people laugh, what did? So, might as well have fun.
Yeah. So when people would criticize I love the format of serious and then a little intermission and then really fun stuff, and the last piece being something that really has everyone leave the concert hall joyful and excited. How do you deal though when they criticize that idea or anything? How would you handle that? Because it never seems to have gotten you down. You kept going and it's just amazing.
Well, I always felt that, well, first of all, I mean, I heard the criticism and all, but it's me, and there's nothing I can do about it. That's my nature. And so I figured, well, really, it's not my problem, is it? It's really their problem. If they can't deal with it, that's, it's okay. I mean, I actually lost dates because of that. I was there were places where I had performed, and then there was a request to have me back, and the manager of that series said, absolutely not. We're not going to have a buffoon come back to us. He doesn't know stage decorum.
Oh my goodness. I think that you're one of the most fun and exciting performers, and that's just such a gift. And you've got
Thank you for that.
No, it's true. You have great personality, and I think that's what our instrument needed. Someone with obviously incredible technical prowess, tons of musicality, and the ability to be so lyrical and really. The first time I heard a recording of yours was the Spirit of Koussevitzky recording, and I remember thinking, oh my God, the bass really can sing. It should be an extension of our voice, and this man has figured out how to do it. And, it's incredible.
Well, the voice was always my inspiration. And in fact, I really wanted to be a singer. I did study singing when I was a very young child, and I sang in choirs, and every chance I had, I sang. And then I sang to the public, and I was and after I finished, and while I was singing, everybody cried. But the only problem is I was singing happy songs.
Oh no.
so so I decided, that I think there's a hint there. So it's better. So I turned my bass. My bass became my voice, and actually I identified with it all through my playing as my voice. It's I feel so much oneness with the instrument, and it breathes like a singer to me, and that's the way, I think the greatest joy I have in playing the bass is singing through the instrument, much more than the technique and everything. I just love to sing. I love melodies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was lucky as a kid because in growing up in Los Angeles, I studied with Herman Hagen, who was with the New York Philharmonic, and he moved out to Los Angeles, retired there, and then became the main teacher there. I mean, Charlie Mingus studied with him, and all these jazzers and all the Los Angeles Philharmonic people studied with him. And I mean, he was quite the amazing teacher. And when I started studying with him, he was already in his late 80s, and he had transcribed so much music. I mean, there were piles of it that he wrote out by hand, and a lot of it was absolutely unadulterated schlock. And and because I was a quick learn, he gave me a new piece every week, so I had to learn a new piece every week. And these schlock pieces, I figured, I didn't really know they were schlock at the time. I just thought, I'm going to put my heart and soul into all of it. And it was, I think, through playing schlock that I developed this lyrical approach to the instrument. So I was lucky to have all that music to begin with. And I think, I mean, it's unfortunate. Everybody thinks they have to study the great masters right away. But I think that there's a big advantage of studying pieces that are just basically lyrical. I mean, there's a lot of opera that's absolutely schlock, and but I love it. I mean, everybody loves these melodies, and so why not play it on the bass? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that inspired me, Gary, was that you commissioned so many pieces for bass. It must be hundreds and hundreds now across the years. Do you remember the very first piece you commissioned? And do you have memories of some of the happy commissions?
Well, that was an amazing thing. I'm happy you asked that question because the first piece that was actually written for me, I didn't commission. I didn't even know the composer. And this was such a thrill because I had produced my first recording when I began my career. That was in around 1962, I think it came out. And it was with a small company in New York called Golden Crest. And they were basically a company that appealed primarily, their market was primarily the schools, and so they did a lot of educational recordings, and but they had everybody playing, and the owner of the company was a good friend of John Barrows, who was a great French horn, unbelievable French horn player, and one of the greatest, really. And he recorded for them, and he had a friend who had written music for him by the name of Alec Wilder. And Alec Wilder was probably best known at that time as a pop composer. He had written for Frank Sinatra and all the top jazz singers, and but he was also loved to write classical music, and And he was determined, like Hindemith, to write something for every single instrument. And he told that to his very dear friend John Barrows, and I had just made that recording. So Barrows said, "You've got to listen to this. This is a bass. Why don't you write for that?" And he did. And then he sent me the music, and I
Wow,
couldn't believe it. And I saw on my first debut recital in New York Town Hall, I included the premiere of his sonata, the Alec Weiler sonata.
What a
wow.
compliment to have a complete stranger that you don't know, you've never met, write a piece for
Yeah.
you.
Isn't that nice? I mean, that's why I wanted to tell you the story, because it was overwhelming. I mean, it was one of the most thrilling things that ever happened to me.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And commissioning works were a big problem, because here I am, I've already told you, I love lyrical music. I love melodies. And unfortunately, my career started at a time when composers weren't writing melodies. I mean, it was the avant-garde movement, and it seeped into everybody. I mean, I even wanted Aaron Copland to write something for me, and he was nearly destroyed by the avant-garde. He told me that personally. He said, they think I'm an old fogey, and they were making fun of him because he wrote tunes. And so I begged him. I said, "Well, how about if you take one of your old pieces," and gave it to me. So he gave me the violin sonata that he wrote, and we worked it together and made it for the bass, and it really sounds good on bass, actually.
I
And
heard you
it's
play
got,
it actually.
yeah, it's
You
got
did.
some nice tunes in it.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I feel the same way. I would rather play Nessun Dorma than something that's
yeah.
what my mom and dad, who are both musicians, would call it blip bleep music. They grew up in that era, and they respected it, but I just would love to play something you can sing. It's
Yeah,
just fulfilling, I think.
yeah.
Now, when you were younger, like a kid, like just starting out, did you enjoy practicing? Were you like rushing over to the bass to do it? Did you have to be encouraged? What was that like?
Well, I think like all kids, I had to be encouraged to some extent, but boy, was I ever lucky. My family came over in probably around the early decade of maybe the early 2K. I'm not exactly sure when they came over from Russia to the United States.
Was it like
And
before the Bolshevik Revolution type
it was just
period?
after that. So like
Okay.
1913 or
Yeah.
1914, they came over. And they brought with them a lot of their friends. They all came over together, a lot of the musicians. And in fact, my
Yes.
grandfather signed the papers to bring Yasha Heifetz over,
Oh,
because
wow.
he had already been, established in New York. And one of the people that came over with him, or actually he did a more circuitous route, but he finally ended up in the United States, was the man named Yuda Demonstein, who is a bass player in Russia. As my grandfather actually studied the bass and the trumpet, and he
Oh.
became better known as a trumpet player, but he did do bass work too. But Yuda Demonstein lived across the street from me,
Mm,
and he knew that I played the bass, and he liked what I was doing. And I'm only like 9 years old.
right.
And so every day I came home from school, and every day Yuda Demonstein came over to my house and practiced with me. I
Ah,
mean,
that is so great to have
was
like a practice buddy that's
a
an
practice
incredible bass
buddy.
player already, you
Yeah.
know? Mm.
And so I started that way. But then after he died, um, one thing I had, I consider this probably, maybe it's a gift, something that I didn't know was so unusual until I started teaching. But I'm one of those people to this day. I'm a futurist. As soon as during the day, I'm already making plans for tomorrow and next week. And I've always
Right.
done that all my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when um, I practice very efficiently. And my mother, and in those days, this was early days of TV, and we were one of the first people on the block to have a television set. And they came in great big cabinets with doors in the front that you had to open up. And my mother put a lock and key, like a chain and a lock over the thing. And until you did your hour, she would not unlock the TV. So I couldn't watch TV. So I had to practice by hour. That was my encouragement.
That
But
works.
I cheated. I practiced 55 minutes. And my mother never really complained. I don't know if she ever really knew I was practicing on 50. But those 55 minutes were really organized. There was never a moment of silence. And there was never a moment where I wasn't thinking about what I was doing and following an agenda, a routine that I had already planned the day before. And as soon as I finished practicing, during the day, I would be thinking about what I'm going to do the next day. And that was, I think that was very motivating, actually, to make me actually want to practice, because I had planned to, I had a plan for what I wanted to do. So many of the students that I've had just go in the practice room and all they do is repeat the same thing over and over, and
Yes.
without thinking and hoping that the bass is going to teach them how to play.
It's
just
true.
kind of weird.
I find with my teaching, I actually give each student a notebook and I organize exactly what they need to do for them. But then I hope that then they're learning how to, the plan. The plan is essential. I have a notebook on my own music stand. And at the end of the day, it's did I get what I needed to accomplish done, or do I push that into tomorrow? And everything should be organized and efficient. I say to my students, I want you to have a life. I want you to be able to put the bass down and enjoy living. But you have these things you've got to accomplish. So stay organized and be efficient. And sometimes I think they just like love a piece and they'll play through it a bunch of times, but they're not fixing it. So I try to help them with like silly phrases like known tricky spots. Find your KTSs and work on those first.
Well, and there's another thing about practicing that I've always believed, and the bass is physically a difficult instrument to play. It's tough on the body.
Yeah.
And so these people who practice 4 or 5 hours or more a day are doing themselves a disservice. You don't really need, if you practice really well and efficiently, you don't need to practice that long.
Yep.
And so I think, and also I think a lot of my efficiency had to do with the fact that I'm basically lazy and always find the easiest way to do everything. And these students who say, boy, I'm sweating and boy, did I have a good workout today. Boy, I really practiced. And then I thought, huh? You know, I think if after you've practiced, you don't feel like you did anything, it's the best kind of practice you could do. It should be, you practice to make it easy, not hard. And if you're struggling and you're working with the struggling all the time, then you're not being intelligent about it. You have to find a way to make it easy. Everything should be easy. And so practicing should never be, a physical challenge ever.
Yeah, I agree. I say to my students, your brain should feel like a bowl of mashed potatoes, just completely by the end. Your
Absolutely
body should
right.
be fine. Your body should be healthy and feeling great. You shouldn't feel physically exhausted. And I think we should be able to get 6 hours of practicing done in 3 hours or less.
Yeah. Boy, I tell you that, at my age, everything having to do with the brain is a challenge. And
I understand that.
So I've taken up jazz piano. I've always wanted to, I'm not a pianist at all. I hate the instrument. In fact, I mean, to me, when I sit at this mechanical, feeling this instrument that gives you absolutely zero feedback like a bass does, it's almost like playing a computer. I mean, it's just I feel so disassociated from the actual instrument itself. But I love the harmonies. and so I practice every morning. I just finished practicing this morning and before coming to the computer. Um, and I tell you, I mean, doing all this learning, all these chords and having to figure all these things out, I get so tired mentally. It's
Yeah.
really a challenge.
It's a
It's a
different kind
challenge.
of thinking too than what we're
Totally
accustomed
different
to.
kind of thinking. Yeah.
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 But it's
That's so
good.
cool that
Good,
you're
good
doing
for these
that.
old gray cells.
I think that's great. What do you wish that people knew about you that people don't really know? I mean, we all know the great Gary Karr and master of the bass and has inspired so many and is responsible for so many of us playing the bass and so many transcriptions and compositions. But are there things that you're like, "Oh, but people don't know this about me?"
Hmm. What were you thinking about?
Once knowing, really.
um, well, one thing, I feel really humbled when I'm around my colleagues, greatly humbled because first of all, I mean, there's so many great bass players that they've technically gone way beyond what I was able to do. And that itself is incredibly humbling. But more than that, I have never been I've never thought of myself with all these accolades that you've been giving me, um, because I practice every day still, and the reason I practice every day is I'm really hoping to get better. And I think in the past year I've made some improvements, um, and that really pleases me. But I really I must say that to some extent, I'm humiliated every day by this bass player on my shoulder who can play rings around me, and I'm always try to be as close to what this wonderful player can do. Um, and it is humiliating because I've never been able to reach it, and so I I feel I'm still a student.
Mhm.
I'm still a student, basically a student, and I share so much of the what is it, the progress, the search, the agony of dealing with the instrument as all my colleagues do. So I feel very much in oneness and very humbled when I'm around all of them because they're doing so well.
I
The one
think
thing
that,
I always
yeah.
said about you, Gary, is because of you, we are where we are today. You are the one who did all the hard work. You went out there and broke down all these barriers because nobody knew what the bass could do. Everyone thought it just sat in the orchestra playing the elephant or in jazz. And you came out and you really shook up the bass world. Did you know you were going to do that?
No, I didn't. Uh, well, again, to go back to the melodious playing, I love to play these melodies, and I was I was on a student recital in Aspen, Colorado when I was 19, I think, and Jenny Turrell, who became my mentor. Jenny Turrell was this great opera singer from the Metropolitan Opera and wonderful recitalist. And she came to my recital, or I mean, she came to the student recital on which I played only a couple of pieces, and I don't remember what it was. And then she invited me to dinner, which to me was, one of the glorious moments of my life. I couldn't believe Jenny Turrell was inviting me to dinner. And she sat down at the piano and put some music down, and she said, "I'd like to sing some Russian songs, and do you think you can come up with an obligato?" Well, that's my background, so it was very easy for me to do that. And and we actually performed together quite a bit, and recorded. And she said, I'm very close friends with Leonard Bernstein, and I want him to hear you. He has to hear you. So she arranged this audition for me to play for Bernstein. And he had a TV program called Young People's Concerts, which at that time was watched by 7 million people around the world. And so here I am in Carnegie Hall on stage alone, and the only person in the entire hall watching me play, listening to me play, was Leonard Bernstein. And that was my audition. And then he said, "I'm going to put you on TV." You know, I think I had one other experience playing with an orchestra before then. Oh, there's a funny story. I don't know if you want to hear this great funny story, but he wanted me to do something solemn and something fun, something more technical. Not necessarily. I think I played it rather seriously then. In fact, I think you can find it on YouTube. So I played the Bloch Prayer, and I got the orchestration from one of my coaches named Alfredo Antonini, who was Toscanini's rival, because Toscanini was NBC and Alfredo Antonini was CBS networks. Anyhow, so he wrote this orchestration, so I had that for the prayer. And he said, "Do you have an orchestration for the Moses Fantasy?" And I said, "Oh yes, of course." Well, I had just failed a course in orchestration at Northwestern University. I didn't. I actually got a C, but the guy wanted to fail me, and the dean said no, because I skipped all the classes. Because, you know, he would say, you know, you have to know the range of an oboe and you have to know the range of a clarinet. Well, I lived in the orchestra. I played in a million orchestras when I was a kid, and I didn't have to know what the limits were. I could hear it in my head. So I skipped a lot of, so I found his classes really boring. And so I lied to Bernstein, and then I went home and wrote the orchestration. And he said, he didn't know that I had written it. And he said, "I'd just like to see it and see if it's okay." And so I submitted the score, and he said, "Fine, we'll do it." So I wrote my teacher at Northwestern University, and I said, "Please tune in to NBC, blah, 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 on such and such a date, because the New York Philharmonic is premiering one of my orchestrations."
Oh, that's excellent.
But anyhow, the reason I told you that whole story is because that started. I mean, what, you know, today you have all the social networking, and but in those days, you know, TV was your only chance to really, if you could appear on TV, you could really make a career.
Sure.
And that really launched it for me. I mean, until then, I really had no aspirations for being a soloist. But once that happened with the New York Philharmonic, then all these I got all these people wanting me to come and play. So that's how it started. Yeah.
That must have been an amazingly. Did you know, like, going into that concert, how big this could be for you and the double bass, and you and the double bass together? Or did it just seem like, oh, neat, this is going to be a fun moment?
I think I was nervous as hell. I think, in fact, I think I wore rubber underwear just in case.
Now, what would you do when you were nervous before a performance? Because I think everyone gets nervous, right? And we try to pretend we're not going to, and we try to focus the adrenaline into something positive. But how did you cope with it? Because I think people would be amazed to hear that Gary Karr was ever nervous, you know, because of who you are.
I have always been nervous before every single concert, every single one. I've just been a wreck before. And in fact, and the reason is because, you know, of the damn bass player on my shoulder. He's going to make fun of me if I mess everything up, you know. And I was always worried, am I going to do well? Am I prepared enough? You know, and, you know, all these things go through my mind. And there was a chap, a medical doctor, who wanted to do some research on, he had done a lot of work with athletes, and he wanted to see, well, what do musicians do? and here I'm playing a physically challenging instrument. So he figured, well, that's a good, this is a great guinea pig to try this experiment. So he hooked me up with these electronic things on my arm and chest and so on, basically to monitor my heart rate. And so I'm standing backstage ready to go on, and it's just beating like crazy, way up there. And I walked out on stage, and I'm nervous as hell. And I put the bow on the string and draw a sound, and my heartbeat instantly goes from a high heartbeat, a fast heartbeat, down to something between 55 and 60 beats per minute. Wow. Instantly. Wow. Yeah. And the only explanation I have for that is that I love the bass so much, and I love that feeling of the bow drawing across the string. It's just, for me, it's just, it's like eating chocolate. Yeah. And
it's home.
It's home. And as soon as I did this, I felt, well, I'm singing now. And I just, kind of went into my own bubble. Mm-hmm. And there I was just playing. And
you're able to ignore that bass player on your shoulder while you're in that moment.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Pretty much. One time,
a workshop, and I talked about these two angels on either shoulder, the good angel and the bad angel. And we always listen to the bad angel, unfortunately, because the good one gives us good advice, but the bad one is louder. And someone drew a picture of me with two angels on my shoulders. So I was standing there with the bass and the two angels. Wow, but it's so true. It's so true. And it's difficult, isn't it, not to listen to the bad angel. It's so difficult because that's the one who shouts at you much more. But the one thing and you've talked about, Gary, about your fantastic sound and singing on the bass. And when did that sound come? Was it there almost from the start, or did you develop it, or?
It was there from the start. In those days, we didn't have, when I began, there wasn't such a thing as a tape recorder. It was done with wire recorders. Wow. And so they recorded me, I think, when I was 9 years old, and the sound was there. It never changed. Amazing.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And I think the reason, and that, well, this has certainly influenced my teaching, because, I like to work with beginners, especially because from day one, I want them to like the sound they're making. That was because of me. That's the way I approach the instrument. I love the sound of the bass. And of course, I had Kusevitsky's recording to support that, because he produced such a beautiful sound on the instrument. Yeah. And I wore that recording out. It was quite an influence on me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
I always told when I did my first press conference in Japan, when I first went there in 1980, there were I think were 90 different magazines. There were, they devoted a lot to classical music in those days. Yeah. And so they were present at this press conference, and they said, well, what attracted you to the bass? And I said, well, chocolate, I said. And they said, why chocolate? I said, because if chocolate could sing, it would sound like a double bass. And if you try to describe chocolate, that's the way I think of the bass sound. It's dark, it's warm, mellow. It's sweet. I mean, all these wonderful adjectives that describe chocolate perfectly describe the bass. So for about 10 years, so all these magazines, 90 magazines, all wrote this all over Japan. So whenever I played recitals, believe it or not, people would come and give me chocolate afterwards. And I usually had I took to the hotel usually about 8 to 10 pounds of chocolate a night.
Wow.
I thought that was the greatest gift I ever got by playing.
I love
It's a
that.
tough life being a musician, isn't it? It really is.
It's
It's been
wonderful.
amazing. Yeah. So, did you ever work with Bernstein after that? Did you ever think of asking him to write a piece for you?
I did.
Mm,
I met with him. Well, we became friends, and
yeah.
I did. I tried numerous times to get him to write a piece, and he kept saying, "Yes, yes, I will." But toward the end of his life, and I kept prodding him to do this. He said, one of my problems with composing, this is what he told me. He said, I have conducted so much music, and I have played on the piano. He was a really great pianist, played so much music on the piano that when I sit down to write, I can't think of anything original. Every time I write three notes, I think I'm writing notes that have already been written. And he said it's really very hard to be original.
Mm.
And so that was, I don't know if at one point he stopped writing, but it was difficult for him.
That's such a
Yeah,
shame for us, isn't it? We didn't
yeah.
get a piece from Leonard Bernstein.
Wouldn't that have been wonderful? Yeah.
It would. And also, you knew Joe Horowitz, who was one of my teachers, at the Royal
Oh, he
College.
was.
Yeah.
I
And
didn't.
yeah, Joe was a great character. I loved him. And I kept asking him to write for bass. I think you did as well. And
Yeah,
he said he didn't think the bass was a solo instrument, so he wouldn't write anything.
yeah. And then he was in Gstaad. I went there every summer for the Menuhin Festival,
Yeah.
and so he came there one time, and then he heard me in recital, and I guess that changed his mind because afterwards he said, "Can I do anything for you?" And I said, "Yeah, write a piece." And he said, "Well, you just played the Grieg Sonata. Why don't I turn that into a concerto?"
Yeah.
And so he orchestrated it and did a beautiful job. I mean, it's a wonderful orchestration.
He was a really great composer, though. It's a
Yeah, it
shame
was phenomenal. Yeah,
when you hear his ballet music and lots of things. And I think, wow, I wish I could have persuaded, I wish you could have persuaded him to write
yeah,
something for us.
yeah. I wish I could have. Yeah.
That's the whole world, isn't it? And I studied with Bronwyn Nash, who'd studied with you. And
Uh,
she once said about composers, she said, opera is our problem. She said, every composer I've asked, could you write a piece of bass? I would like to, but I'm writing an opera. And opera has stopped us getting all these great pieces.
and
Um,
that's interesting. I won, as a student at the Juilliard, um, I did Hans Vernahense came to conduct our orchestra in an opera that he wrote, the Elegy for Young Lovers, it was called.
yeah,
I don't know if it's ever been performed since then, but
it's been
it's
done
a
over here.
it is good. I'm happy to hear that because it is lyrical Hans Werner Henze. It's so lyrical and so beautiful. And I thought, wow, now this guy should write for the bass. And so I approached him about it, and he said, "Sure, I'll write you a piece. You get me the money, and I'll write for it." So I went to the Rockefeller Foundation in New York, and I said, "Hans Werner Henze, the great Hans Werner Henze, wants to write a piece for me. Do you think you would be able to handle the commission on this?" And they agreed to do it. So that's how I got the piece, and that actually was a turning point in my career too, because they said we'll give you the money for the commission, but you can no longer do orchestral work anymore. You have to focus on solo playing. Um, because up to that time, I was freelancing in New York like crazy. I was the
Yeah,
first sub at the Metropolitan Opera, which was great
right.
fun because I didn't have to go to rehearsals, but I played all this wonderful music at the opera. And So Henze writes this piece for me. Biggest disappointment of my life. There's no tunes, I mean,
Mhm.
not really. The elegy for young lovers wasn't present in this piece at all. And I don't know what he was thinking about when he wrote. Well, I know what he was thinking about, but I don't want to share that either. But yeah, yeah, strange guy. He was a very strange guy, I thought. But anyhow, it's disappointing. It doesn't really feature the bass in the way I wanted the bass featured.
And are there any composers who turned you down?
Oh, I don't. Well, it's just saying absolutely no. I don't think so. I think they always had excuses. It was I'm writing an opera.
An opera. Which they should have just taken an aria and given it to you.
Yeah, yeah. But the problem I mean, money got involved, and they usually got if they wrote music, they usually had quite a wonderful source for commissioning and paying for their time to write. And so you really couldn't go to a major composer unless you had that kind of financial backing behind you. And that was problematic because I didn't know all these foundations, and I wasn't very good at finding it and asking rich people to pay for something like that. So I was at a disadvantage.
So I think that's a hard thing to do, to just sort of ask people for money for commissions and whatnot.
I've never been in. I can ask people for money to give to, like I've been on numerous arts boards here.
Sure.
And I turned out to be a good fundraiser. But I never really ever asked people for money. I always found ways in fact, they would come to my house and I'd play recitals. There would be like, I could do like 30 people at a time. And these organizations would invite people who they thought could be potential donors. And I said, the rule is that when these people come to the house, you do not ask for money. They all know why they're there. Yeah. And so one season, I remember we did a concert once a month for the opera here in Victoria, and we raised $700,000 without asking for it.
Wow.
Now, I wish I could have done that. Or asking composers to write for me, but
right.
No.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, for all the influence and the music that because of you now exists, whether it's been composed or transcribed, we're all forever indebted to, even though you didn't feel comfortable asking for money for these things, it happened. People wanted to write and transcribe for you. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And
well, I was very lucky. I mean, Wilfred Josephs wrote a wonderful concerto, beautifully lyrical concerto, but he had sources. A lot of these composers have sources.
Yeah.
So I forget who it was that paid for it, but I didn't.
Wolf was a great friend of mine as well towards the end of his life.
Yeah.
I remember sitting down with him, and he got a tape recorder of you playing his sonata, you and Harman playing his sonata. And we sat there one Saturday afternoon at his kitchen table, just listening to your performance. And Wilf still had the manuscript there, so we were reading the score. And it was so funny. He said, I don't remember writing this at all. And afterwards he said, it's quite a good piece, isn't it? Not so bad, Wilf. It's not so bad. And yes, I was so pleased to get to know Wilf and get to know the bass music that you'd commissioned from him towards the end of his life. And he, again, a great composer, and he always kept that last bit of humor right for the end, as you said.
Yeah.
And he was fantastic at that. He was
he was a very jolly fellow. I loved him very much.
He had many good stories. He was a good storyteller, good raconteur. I used to go to the pub with him when he lived in North London. There's a pub next door. And we just sit there, and I just wouldn't say a word because it would just be one story, one joke after another. And he was just such fantastic company to be with. And he never changed. It was so nice.
Yeah. I love being with him for the same reasons. Great fun.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
And did you think, or when you look back from your career now, are you quite astounded at what you've achieved and what you've done and how things have changed because of you?
You know, that's an interesting question. You know, Harmon and I were very different,
Mm.
um, in that Harmon would, the book that Susan read could not have been written without Harmon, because he was the kind of person who would sit down and think about the past and reminisce a lot. And as I mentioned before, I'm such a futurist that I almost never go to the past. I never think about the past at all. And so Mary Randy, who wrote the book, was asking a lot of questions I couldn't answer. I had no recollection whatsoever. But not only could Harmon remember playing there, he remembered the party afterwards and the names of the people who attended the party.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, and we would go back to the town again, and he'd meet these people and remember their names.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
you know, I can't remember names. I've never been able to do that. I think it's a
You
miracle
can.
I can
You're
remember all
amazing.
the music I played, but you know,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
but no, in answer to your question, I really never think about the past at all, and I so I don't know whether it's remarkable or not, because it just happened. Um, I went to dinner last night with some people, and they put on an old recording of mine. It's the last thing I want to do is to listen to myself play. And and there were pieces on the recording I don't even remember playing.
Yep.
I just
Yep.
and I thought, oh, but I did like the lyrical sound.
Good for you. Good for you.
So
I
being
in fact, while I was having dinner, I said, maybe at my age I should listen to my own recordings.
and
But
enjoy it.
I've always hated it. I've hated everything I've recorded. I just can't stand to listen to myself because I hear all the things that are wrong.
That happens when I listen to myself too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So being such a futurist, what do you have lying ahead for your future plans? Do you have things that you're planning and looking forward to?
Well, one thing I'm planning to do at some point, I mean, finding a pianist now is a little challenging, but I did
Yeah.
line up a pianist, wonderful pianist. The Hindemith Sonata is greatly misunderstood, and it's a really
Mm,
great piece. It's one of our important pieces in our bass repertoire.
yeah.
And but it is so bad. There's so many things about it that's wrong. The metronomic markings are wrong. Um, and Hindemith actually came to the Juilliard and conducted us. And so I had an opportunity to really sense who the man is. And he was very lyrical. Uh, he and So that's one of the mistakes in that is, and I see on YouTube a lot of performances of it, and it I feel I need to do something. So I thought, first of all, it's very programmatic.
Mm.
And I thought I should really maybe have some interesting visuals along with the performance to show um, my interpretation, the programmatic aspects of it, to give people something that they can hang their hat on.
I love
And
that.
but so that that's one thing I really wanted to do, is to,
That sounds great
yeah.
because I think it is very, I feel like it's meant to be lyrical, but it gets very choppy and kind of robotic sounding sometimes. And
Yeah. No,
yeah.
it's charming. It's got
Yeah.
humor in it,
So much personality.
a lot of personality, and the last movement is really, really passionate, and
Yeah.
it's sad and full of angst, and
Mhm.
it's just wonderful. I like to play angst, but no, that's something that I feel really, really strong about. So I'm determined to do that. That's, apart from my studying the jazz piano, that's on my
Um,
bucket list.
I'm looking forward to that. That's great. I think that is something that's needed for that piece and
Yeah,
for all of us. Just a
yeah,
reimagining of it, or, I
yeah,
love the visuals idea too. That's great.
yeah.
I'm looking forward to your first CD as a jazz pianist as well.
Oh, I don't think that's going to happen, but
That'd be so funny. Korean opening up.
no, I think for me it's a lot of fun. Be now I can harmonize pieces. We're one line performers. And even though we hear the harmonies, they're to actually harmonize a piece. Takes a different kind of approach, and so it's been really fun. Yeah, I went online I did a Zoom with some of the guys at Berkeley
Oh,
College of
cool.
Music.
I teach there.
Oh yeah, I know. And so and Ron Carter and all these people that are with the school,
Yeah.
they said, I told them, I said, I'm studying jazz piano. They said, listen, we have a good gig for you. Are you available?
That is awesome.
That's it. Oh.
Oh, it broke my heart. I wanted to be at the convention this past June, and I just, life sometimes happens. I couldn't get there. And when I saw that you were playing with Steve and Victor, who are, I work with at Berkeley, but they're also dear friends of mine, and I was, oh my gosh, I wanted to be there in person for that. That must have been so magical, and people are still talking about it. Such a highlight of the convention.
I find that so unbelievable because I thought I played like shit. um, I
But don't you
'cause
always think that? You're critical of yourself.
I'm very critical, but the circumstances, first they approached me to do it, and I said absolutely not. Because I've given up performing in public for good reason. I don't want to go through all that all that angst before. I don't really want to relive any of this.
Yeah.
And one of the beauties of retiring is that I don't have that stress on my back anymore, and
Mhm.
which is really wonderful. And so I said, the only way, maybe if I can find someone who give me a beta blocker, maybe, which is something I've never done. But I thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to do something like that. Then I didn't have a bass with me, and so they gave me a bass, which was a good sounding instrument, but for me very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And and so that was against it. And then I said, isn't there, because I have this strange feeling about bows. There were a lot of wonderful bows, but none of them I would ever own at the convention, because number one, they're too long. I don't like long bows. I don't understand why French bows are short and German bows are long. That never made any sense to me. So I always bought really quite high quality French bows and put a German frog on them,
Ah.
and so I'm given this bow that weighed twice as much as it's long, and weighed twice as much, because I like a light bow too. So I had these.
Awkward.
So I'm playing I'm that's a confrontation I didn't enjoy. And then they had put rosin on the bow, and I just find it, I I guess I don't know how many people do this, but I don't like I any of the base rosins. I find really problematic for me.
Mhm.
And so I use I don't like anything that sticks to the string.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to dry the hair basically, so that
Mhm.
the bow works. And so I use very dry rosins, and that way I can get closer to the bridge and do things. Well, in the performance, I even got stuck at one point because I
I
couldn't
hate
get
that way.
the rosin. They did everything they could to remove the rosin, but there was still too much on there. So all that was problematic. Anyhow,
Mm.
so I prepared the audience because uh, Steve said, Gary, why don't we'll play something kind of upbeat, like Sunny or something like that. I said, I'm not really not in the mood, and I'm thinking about this bass too. I said, I don't know about that. And I said, I'd like to do a ballad with you guys, and I'm sure that'll be fun.
Yeah.
So I prepared the audience. I said, okay, 60 years ago, I gave a recital in Los Angeles, my hometown. And afterwards, my mother came backstage. And then this woman walked up to the two of us and said, Gary, when you play, you make me cry. And then she left. And my mother said, did you hear that? You better practice a lot more.
I was going to say, not like the crying with the singing.
So I got everybody in the mood, and then I said, now I'm going to play The Shadow of Harmon's Smile.
Mm.
And people cried.
Oh,
And
of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
I got
yeah.
emotional too playing it.
How could you not? But what a wonderful, loving tribute. And for
Yeah.
everyone to be able to share in it with you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really nice, I must say. And the response was wonderful, very embracing, and was kind of a cathartic for me. It was a great moment. Yeah.
Nice tribute.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's super.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to the next convention. We'll all be there in person and get to see each other
I'm
in real
going.
life.
I
Me
wouldn't miss
too.
it.
I'm not gonna miss it. I don't care what happens. I don't care if I have to walk. I'm getting there.
Well, I watched the video. It was good. I really enjoyed that, but it wasn't like you're being there. We could
No,
ask
no.
questions, and
I know. So next time, and maybe David and we have some plans for some more duos and things. So
oh,
yeah,
good,
that'll be good. That'll be
good.
good. So that'll be something to look forward to. But just to have you here with us today and sharing some stories, it's such a treasure. And thank you for taking time out of your life to share with us. It's just, I feel so blessed to be able to do this. It's really nice.
Well, thank you for that. That's really sweet. And I have to get into the garden, I tell you. We've been having very warm weather for Victoria, nothing compared to the rest of the world, but I mean, it's not hot here, but it's unusually dry. We haven't had rain for 18 days. So yeah, so I'm doing a lot of watering, and gardening is second to the base. Gardening is my next passion.
Oh, that's
And
nice.
then the next to that is my trains.
Oh, I love
I
trains.
I love trains, and I have them in the garden. I have 5 trains running around beds in the garden.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
and then the other thing I love is clocks and watches. So, I'm making up for a lot of lost time because I'm I'm a mechanical idiot, and I really want to learn all about this. So I'm learning how a clock operates and take it apart,
so
put it
nice.
together again, and do all these things. Learn how to work a lathe and things like
Wow.
that. So yeah.
That's
My
great.
parents would never. Oh no, you can't do that. You're going to hurt your hands.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well,
That's one of the problems of growing in a musical family.
Right. Yes. I wanted to play volleyball, but it's going to hurt your fingers, so I didn't. And
It's amazing that my father, he put up with me, but my father was an athlete. I mean, he wanted to. There's a great baseball team here called the Cardinals, and he
yes.
was offered a contract. This is probably in the 1930s, and he was the last born in a family of 8 children, and he had to support his mother, and they didn't pay enough,
Not then. Now they
so
would.
he couldn't. And
So did he
so I would
follow
sit.
baseball when you were a kid? Did he keep watching it?
No, I don't like sports. That's what my problem. My father, I was the biggest disappointment ever because I was a fat kid and nobody wanted me on their team, and
Oh.
I was very unathletic, and so my father, was disappointed, to say the least.
Sure. Well, it's, you didn't have that common bond because he was in sports land. So,
Yeah.
but I'm
But
sure,
he supported my musical endeavor for sure.
yeah, I'm sure you
Yeah.
made him proud in his own way, even if he
Yeah.
scratched his head and said, "I said baseball, not bass."
Yeah. Well, I was surrounded by bass players as a kid because my grandfather played and my uncle played and my cousin played, and my father, in desperation, studied the bass
Oh wow.
during the
Okay.
war. So he played in USO bands,
Perfect.
you know. And I
Yeah.
remember playing pizzicato was a big problem. It hurt his fingers,
Oh,
and you know what he used to do? I mean, I'm thinking about it, it's probably the most dangerous thing you could do, but he put embalming fluid on his fingers to
my
harden
yes,
them up.
my brother-in-law's dad had friends they were Polish and they had friends in a polka band. And when I first met him, he said, "Oh, you play bass? I've got embalming fluid you could use for your fingers so that you don't get calluses." And I thought, "Oh dear God, no!" But it
Yeah.
was in the polka bands around the Boston area. That's what the guys did with their bass playing fingers.
Oh yeah, we did, horrible things. I remember going to the pharmacist and buying xylene, which is if you inhale it, it's carcinogenic. It's terrible.
Jeez.
And that's how we cleaned our instruments. And
Oh, oh
yeah,
wow. Yeah.
yeah.
Happy
Oh,
memories.
And I
well,
believe, and we did all weird things. I mean, um, I played on gut strings most of my youth,
yeah.
and I always had a a nut. What do you call it? It had oils in
Oh,
it, the
for the
biggest.
oil.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
always had that nut on my stand,
Oh my
and
gosh.
then after every practice session, I wiped all the strings with the nut to put the oil back in.
Oh wow.
Otherwise they would unravel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, gut strings are a whole
oh,
other beast.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. The stories, though. Oh, I could do this all day. Well, when I was reading your book, I was noticing that you and I have some similarities. My grandfather was a shoemaker,
Oh,
and I
no
know you.
kidding.
Yes. And I
Yeah,
came from a musical family, but my grandfather was also a saxophone player in a dance band. And it was, there was music on both sides of my family. But also, this is a little bit of a couple of funny little things. So I grew up in Boston and I'm still in Boston. You had a high school music director, Dr. Murray Lefkowitz, I think was his
that's
name.
right. Yeah.
His son, Ronan, is a friend of mine. He's in the Boston Symphony, and I'm there a first call sub there. So I see him all the time. I saw the name. I was like, Lefkowitz? No way. And I looked it up. I was like, oh, they're related. And when I was learning pizzicato, you said something in the book about watching your sister Arla play on the harp.
Hmm.
I had studied Ann Hobson Pilot, who was the harp player in the Boston Symphony when I was a kid, and I
Oh,
watched her pizzicato, and I thought it sounds so. Oh my gosh, her playing was so rich and full, and so I tried to emulate that on the bass. And I read that, and I thought it's the first person that I ever heard of that didn't say that's weird. You did it too, and
isn't that
it made
something?
me, yeah, it made me feel very cool.
I love it. I watched my sister, and it did influence my pizzicato playing. And the other thing that influenced my pizzicato playing, and I asked him a lot of questions. There was a great guitarist named Segovia, and
Oh yes.
and he was when my first jobs out of Juilliard was at the North Carolina School of the Arts,
Oh
and he
sure.
was on the faculty, and
Wow.
so I watched him play very closely, and I saw he got this warm, rich sound on the guitar, and it rang for a long time. And I asked him, "How do you do that?"
Mhm.
And he said, "You move your finger very across the string slowly, and you
Mhm.
give as slow a release as possible so that it'll ring." So I
Nice.
tried that on the bass. It works great with the thumb. because you have
Yeah.
more space on your thumb
Right.
to move across, and you can get this long sustaining pizzicato if you do that. Segovia style.
That's great.
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
That's so much fun. So yeah, I've started to feel like I have things in common with Gary Carr. It just felt so neat. But it's exciting, and I just want to thank you, and David too, for joining us today. Maybe we'll have you back.
More stories.
Yes, I love the stories because the stories, when you tell them, it just brings everything to life so beautifully. It's really fun to hear in your own words, and the way your voice is expressive with it all. It's just super
It's kind of
exciting.
fun, I mean, maybe I'll turn into Wilfred Josephs because again, in order to tell stories, you have to recall the past, which
Mm.
is, but lately I've been meeting with friends and they'll say something about, they'll say South Africa or they'll say something about, and then I'll say, oh, I have a story about that. And then I recall it.
Oh,
And
that's
so I
great.
started telling, I think it's a new phase of my life, telling stories. So I have a
Hmm.
lot of fun. Yeah.
It's a
It's nice to
great.
recall these things.
It
And,
is.
and I'm dipping into a part of my brain that I never did before by
Right.
reminiscing and telling stories. Yeah.
Right.
This is a
Right.
lot.
Yeah,
But our
that's
whole
wonderful.
lives are made up of memories. And
Isn't
it's
it?
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to recall them. I've just left Wells Cathedral School. I was there 26 years.
Oh
And it's
my.
gone so quickly. And I'm just posting photographs of concerts we did and posters and things. And I'm reliving them as I'm posting them on Facebook. And it's such a nice, these are such nice memories. And you suddenly, you remember things which you'd forgotten. One thing will jog something else. And I think it's nice to reminisce. I don't think you have to live in the past. I think that's wrong. I think you have to live in the present and plan for the future. But it's nice to dip it. For me, I
Yeah.
enjoy dipping in the past. And that's what's been nice today about listening to some of your past
Yeah.
directly from you.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for that. Yeah. Well, I have to do more reminiscing then.
Yeah, I think so, Gavin.
Excellent. Well, I don't want to keep you from your garden too long. Although, what do you grow in your garden?
I was just thinking, in reading the book, my mother, when she met my father, was introduced to her as Joe Karr. My father was a fraternal twin, and his sister was Mary. And so on my father's birth certificate, it's Joe, not Joseph, because in a Jewish family to have twins named Joseph and Mary, I think is a little bit
Oh,
odd.
yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh,
So,
yes.
and so, but that wasn't his name. And it was a name that was given to him because he worked on Karr Street in St. Louis, and he was a humorous guy, as they called him, Joe Karr. So, and my
Ah,
mother didn't like his name. The name was Cornbleet, which is
okay.
like cornflower in German,
Sure.
and so she had to change. I think I was 4 years old. My sister was 2, and
Oh
they changed,
wow.
and she changed the name to Karr, make it official.
Oh
Um,
wow.
but so in the garden, there's a flower that keeps popping up all over the place, and I cannot get rid of it. It's almost like a weed, but it's quite beautiful.
Mm.
It's purple, and which is my favorite color, and and it's it is a nice addition to the garden, even though I have other things I want to put there, but it still creeps in. And guess what it is?
Is it a cornflower?
A cornflower.
That's really special. That's something you just can't pull out.
I never planted it. I
That's
mean, it just
amazing.
arrived. Yeah,
It's just meant to be there. It's meant
it's
so
meant to
they.
be there.
Yep.
Meant to
Yep.
be remind me of my past.
Oh wow. Well, that's your dad saying he loves you and he's proud of you, I think.
I hope so.
That's how
That'd
I
be
would
nice.
interpret it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, That's so cool. Well, that might be just the perfect story to wrap up with today, but that kind of brought tears to my eyes. I love that. Well, thank you to the incredible, wonderful, amazing Gary Karr for joining us today on Base Talk with Hagen and Hayes. What a special episode and a true treat. And I really do hope that you'll come back and share more stories with us.
I'll jig them up until
Wonderful.
then.
Oh, thank
It has
you.
been a lot of fun for me to be with both you and David. It's great.
Thank you so much,
for
Gary.
inviting me.
Thank
Nice
you
to see you
for
again.
joining
Thank
us.
you
This
so
is
much.
wonderful.
Nice to see you both.
Thank you.
Great.